when he was shot. But regardless of whether, there's dispute about whether or not he had his hands up. But no one disputes the fact, actually, and this is interesting because I obtained the Louisiana State Police report on that incident. No one disputes the fact that he was unarmed when he was shot to death. He had no weapons on him or near him, and he was shot to death. And at least one, and perhaps more, of the women who would later be killed witnessed that incident. And I also know for a fact that, for example, Kristen Gary Lopez, who was murdered in 2007, she was brought in by cops and interviewed about, I believe, the Loretta Chatson murder, the first victim in 2005. So there's a pattern of these women being interviewed as witnesses in other homicides and then getting killed.
And is there any connection or any thought that whatever statements they gave or what led to their death, if we're going with the police are definitely deeply involved and responsible kind of aspect of it?
Yes, I believe so. I think you see the pattern over and over again, and you see it with Kristen Lopez being interviewed in Loretta Chatson. You see it in Laconia Brown, who's a victim in 2008. She was interviewed about the 2005 homicide of Ernestine Patterson. You see that pattern over and over again where these women are witnesses. Then the other pattern that you see over and over again is that the women, just before they were killed, would say, I know who's doing this, the police are involved, I fear for my life, and many of them said, I know I'm going to die, and then they would be killed.
We sort of wonder why more of them didn't just leave town or go into hiding or something.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I feel, we're talking about a population that's like extremely poor and has very, very few options. So I think they were just sort of stuck where they were.
Leaving town's not an easy option.
Yeah.
Yeah, not an easy option. That said, one thing that's interesting to me, particularly since the piece came out and doing the investigation that I'm doing, is that there are quite a few survivors of that era who do know quite a bit, and they're still around. So they didn't get everybody. There are a number of women who were in that scene who do know quite a bit about what happened, who are still alive.
Yeah, because that wanted to bring me back. I wanted to come back for a minute to Danny Barry. Richard said that Barry was the killer because they all stopped in 2009 when he died.
Correct. I believe it was. Yeah, I think he died in 2010. But
okay.
But the last homicide was 2009. Yeah, I mean, I think Richard has his own purpose for making that claim, which is, not me, it's him. My sense of Danny Barry, especially from reading all the witness interviews about him that the task force conducted, is that Barry was deeply involved in the prostitution scene in South Jennings, which is where all these women are from. He would pick up these women and bring them back to his house. And at least one witness, task force witness, talked about Barry having some sort of dungeon in his house with chains and whatnot.
And I assume that was one of the prostitutes that he took back home with him.
Yeah. And I'm developing now, I don't have, I'm not there yet, but I'm developing information as I go about his involvement in his possible involvement, I should say, in the murder of Brittany Gary, the very young 17-year-old victim who was killed in 2008.
Well, and his involvement, I mean, if we believe Richard, the task force, I understand, is kind of working on the assumption that it's, the one mad killer, and he would fit that bill easily, wouldn't he? If based on these statements of the dungeon.
Barry would fit that bill. From my investigation, I don't believe that he is the killer. I don't believe, and I say this in the piece, that there is one killer. I think it's a number of people. I think that you could hone in on Barry for at least one of the homicides, but I don't think that he's responsible for all of them, even though he fits, as you say, fits the bill.
Well, and
for sure. So,
because he's deceased, he's an easy mark.
Correct. He's a very easy mark.
Have you been able to talk to his widow?
I haven't yet, no. That's something I want to do. I haven't yet talked to his widow. He gave a statement before he died to the task force that was extremely unilluminating, and it was unhelpful primarily because the task force is so terrible at conducting interviews. He also told the task force that his wife, now widow, was refusing to be interviewed by the task force.
Now, the private investigator, Kirk Menard, that's his name, correct?
Correct, yeah.
What has been his contribution? Because I've seen stuff about him, but I'm not really clear on exactly what he's doing.
Good question. What Menard is doing, and I don't want to speak for him, but this is my impression of what he's doing, is that he's able to talk to a number of people who perhaps would not talk otherwise. And he then forwards those people directly to the task force. So essentially what he is like a kind of a conduit between people on the street who might not feel comfortable going directly to the task force. You see what I'm saying? And
yeah, he's kind of a neutral party for them.
Yeah, he's kind of a neutral party, and that's what he's doing. You know, he's in a very awkward position now, though, after he had sent these two witnesses to the task force, and they told these witnesses things like, Frankie Richard works for us. You know, he's in an awkward position because I don't think he knows what to make of the task force now. And I wouldn't want to be in his position either, because it's a strange place to be sending witnesses such huge problem. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh,
I mean,
yeah.
to me, the task force, which is dominated by the sheriff's office, by the way, and I mentioned that in the piece, really is not to be, has zero credibility in my view, because what you have is a task force that's dominated by the sheriff's office taking witness statements, and in the witness statements, the witnesses are saying Deputy so-and-so and Deputy so-and-so are involved in the homicide, and the people taking those statements are co-workers of the people implicated in the murders.
Yeah.
You know? It couldn't be more of a clear conflict of interest, and it couldn't be more of a clear problem. Huge problem. You know, how is a task force supposed to conduct an investigation when all of their friends and coworkers, when their friends and coworkers are suspects?
Yeah.
So, it's a huge problem. And I think the task force is kind of the problem in making any headway in this case. You just can't tell me that the task force can investigate its own.
No.
It's just not possible. So that's the problem.
Is there any indication that the governor's office has gotten any interest in this, or that the FBI perhaps would come in and take over the investigation?
It's a good question. From the state side, after my piece ran, a local news station out there asked the Attorney General, the Louisiana Attorney General, Buddy Caldwell, they're doing anything. And he just sort of punted on the question and said, there's the task force, and that's what we're doing. Okay. Now, the FBI side is interesting and also very depressing in the sense that the task force is depressing. Because when you look at the task force interviews, it has obviously the name of the interviewee, / witness. And then it also has the names of law enforcement folks who are present during those interviews. So it'll say, witness, Ethan Brown, present, deputy, so-and-so, and then deputy so-and-so. And then occasionally it'll say that an FBI agent is present. And these are FBI agents from the Lake Charles office, Lake Charles and Calcasieu Parish, which is next to Jeff Davis Parish. And many times when the FBI agents are present, there are very clear allegations of law enforcement involvement in the murders being made by witnesses. And the FBI agents are present for when these allegations are made. And what's happening there? What is the FBI doing about this? Because any kind of misconduct just out under the sun by law enforcement can be prosecuted federally.
Yeah, and it's
there's a federal statute called deprivation of rights under the color of law. So if I'm a cop, let's just say I live in New Orleans, and I'm an NOPD cop, and I walk outside my house and I see somebody jaywalking, right? And I grab him and I kick his head in. That can be prosecuted federally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If I'm a cop and I go out to a crime scene and I dispose of evidence, that can be prosecuted federally. I mean, there's so many entryways into this case federally, and it's stunning to me that none are taken.
Yeah.
And it's particularly given the fact, again, that I know for a fact, because I've seen the interviews, that FBI agents are present when allegations of law enforcement misconduct are made. But I can't answer. I don't know why nothing is happening, but I do know that the FBI is aware of it.
Have you tried to reach out to them, or are they just ignoring you, or?
I have. I do know for a fact that the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of Louisiana is looking at this, is aware. I don't know what they're doing. Again, it's a mystery to me. My guess, and this is only my guess, is that the local FBI office out in Lake Charles, I fear that they're close with, many of the law enforcement folks that are under a cloud of suspicion on this.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're not moving as a result of that.
So it comes back to that.
Although again, I can say it's really complicated. There was a lot of police misconduct during and after Katrina in New Orleans, and it took years for those cases to go federal. Why did it take as long as it did for those cases to go federal? What was the route, right, that those cases took exactly? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows other than people who work for the U.S. Attorney's Office down here.
Yeah, I think that
nobody but them is privy to that sort of information. Why did it take as long as it took?
It could be nothing more sinister than government inertia. I mean, you know how ponderous the federal government can be sometimes. It might be that simple.
Yeah, and it might be as simple as, prosecutors have vast discretion in in terms of the cases they pursue. Why do they pursue this and not that? They have a lot of discretion there. So it could be something as simple as discretion. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know, what they're doing. I think that I know that under Eric Holder, police misconduct is a big priority for DOJ to prosecute. I know that. So I'd hope that this would catch their attention because of that priority, but it hasn't yet, as far as I know.
Yeah, well, it might be, too, that they've actually reviewed it pretty carefully and realized that there's no way they can come out of it looking good. Because they can take over the case, but let's face it, I mean, there's a lot of conflicting information, and there appear to be hardly any physical evidence. And so it's...
Correct.
And, of course, the trail is very cold. The last murder was 5 years ago, so the possibility of the feds coming in and, on their white horse and actually solving these murders is pretty limited. So maybe for that reason alone, they realize it's not a case that's going to cover them with glory. It's going to be a case that they'll take over to great fanfare and then grind along for a few years and then not solve either.
Correct. I mean, it is a very complicated case. A lot of narrative statements and a lot of completely uncredible witnesses. And, there are old cases which makes them harder to solve. All of that said, I do think that they do have a number of ways in, particularly when it comes to, federal cases in particular are all built on flipping people against one another. And I think in this case, you have quite a few people who could be easily flipped.
Frankie Richard.
Being one, I think, and there's quite a few others. when the feds prosecuted the NOPD misconduct cases, they would get people, they would haul people before a federal grand jury. And if one of the cops engaged in the sort of lying and that they had engaged in the past, they would get a federal charge for that. Going up before a federal grand jury and lying is a federal crime.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the feds wield such an incredible hammer, no matter who they're going after, that it's doable.
Well, and that gets to the question for you, which is, do you think that any of these will ever be solved?
Good question. I certainly don't believe the task force will ever solve them. I do believe the only hope in this case would be federal interest, DOJ interest, and specifically interest from the DOJ Civil Rights Division, which goes after law enforcement misconduct. I think that's the only way. Now, will it happen? I have no idea. But I think that's yeah.
Yeah, it seems unlikely because this has been going on for a long time, and they haven't stepped in.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Okay, well, that's our interview with Ethan, and
I'm so glad I was there.
Yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, that is a lot of information, and it's hard to digest it all.
And by the way, a lot of thanks to Ethan again for
absolutely
taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know it took us a while to catch up with him, and I'm glad that he was able to move his schedule around to do it, because it really, I think it does this story a lot of justice to get all of the information straight from the proverbial source. And Ethan really kind of has been the source here. As he talked about, nobody thought he was doing the story he was doing, so gave him the details they gave him.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The fallout for him is like, at first everybody was willing to talk to him, and now some people are a little ticked off with him.
And he's got to tread lightly around some people.
Yeah, he's got to be a little more careful and a little more circumspect now.
Now, I think Joe had mentioned this before. Ethan's been working on this for a good while, and as he said, the original article he wanted to submit was 30,000 words. The article that's up is 8,000, so that's a huge amount of information. And he's since gotten the book deal. He's gotten a book deal. I don't think we've talked about that yet.
Yeah.
And it's on the order of 100,000 words. But so there's the book deal, and then there's some other things.
Oh, I guess, I mean, it doesn't necessarily pertain to Ethan so much as it pertains to this kind of vague speculation that the TV series, the HBO TV series True Detective, which some of you may or may not be familiar with, is loosely based on this story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's fair to say that it's not. It doesn't, derive facts from this story or anything like that. But I definitely, I watched True Detective as it was on, coming out originally. So I guess it's been, gosh, I'm going to say 4 or 5 months since the last episode of the first season aired. And immediately, I've vaguely been aware of Jefferson Davis 8 or the Jennings 8. But as soon as I started really getting into it, I just kept thinking, this sounds so much like True Detective. Just the vague ideas of, X number of murders, the weird
connections
in a parish in Louisiana, the kind of weird twisted people,
personality,
sort of incestuousness of the whole situation.
And also the not to do spoilers or anything, but also a certain amount of potential police involvement and how much that allegation may or may not be true. And I think if you haven't watched True Detective and you have any kind of stomach for things like this, watch it.
Yeah.
Just immediately. But I think it's also very interesting the parallels you can draw between these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we should probably, that was part of our interview, and we haven't shared that with everybody yet. But let's share that part of the interview with Ethan where he talks about some of that stuff.
Yeah, and actually I should mention one thing I should definitely mention. I think I briefly mentioned this, but I should be more specific about it. I have a book deal with Scribner, which is a division of Simon & Schuster, to write a book about this. And I'm quite excited about it for a number of reasons. One, the original draft that I turned in for the piece was 8,000. So, I've got a lot of stuff that I have not used at all, and I've got a lot of material that I'm still developing. So it's exciting for that reason. And it's also